Namo Shakyamunaya Buddhaya. Dear Thai, dear brothers and sisters, dear friends, our dear friends, our dear practitioners who are present online. Today is the 14th of March, 2021. We are greeting a spring, the spring. The spring is gradually manifesting in the hidden mountains, and I see that the spring is like a signal of hope, of love, of life. And this morning, as I was walking around the monastery ground, and I saw so many different kinds of wild flowers, and I also saw these iris flowers, and I invited them to come back with me so that I would like to use the image of nature, of the image of the violet color, which is symbolic of loyalty, faithfulness. These images of nature, so that we can also, I also would like to invite our beloved friends who have passed away this past year during the pandemic, and also our beloved who have passed away all over the world. All of us, we need to remember them, and I would like to invite all of us to cultivate this love, this compassion, and to remember our beloved. And the coming of the spring is also the image of hope. It's like we say that we see the light at the end of the tunnel. Slowly, slowly, many of us have been able to receive the vaccination. Yesterday, there were some sisters who went to Paloma Hospital in Escondido to receive the vaccination. And sisters, when they came back, they shared that, just to see all of the volunteers, the nurses who pay so much attention, concerns with us, we were so moved. And so I see very clearly that the spring is here, and hope is here, love is here, and we have a lot in our hands still. And we can begin again with all this love and this hope. And Brother Fablu also said to me, sent a message to me, say, please remember to talk about the International Women's Day. We see clearly that in our society nowadays, the grandmothers, the mothers, the women, these are all the hands that give us warmth, protection, care, to take care of the children, to take care of the spouses, to take care of society. The women contribute in high government officials, the women who are pilots, who are leaders in the Air Force. So we have so many good news, and not only the despairing news. So let us all breathe together. Let us breathe with the spring that gives us a lot of hope, a lot of love. A few days ago, a younger sister asked me, "What will I be sharing?" And I said to her in English, "Simple but miraculous." That's what I will be sharing about. That is something that has been challenging for me during the pandemic. Simple but miraculous. That's what I'll be sharing. I want to share about what I have practiced, how I have lived. I put my whole heart in the practice. So today I ask permission to share about what I have gone through, what is simple but miraculous. A few days ago, my elder sister also told me a story when she gave consultation to a young woman in her 30s. And she's very well educated, knowing many languages, but because she had some mental crisis, and so there was turbulence in her life. There was not so much peace in her life. She experienced a lot of crisis, and there were times she wanted to die. There were times she had this crisis, mental crisis that was so severe. And the most recent time, she was so tense. She called 911, and they brought her to a psychiatric hospital. And in that hospital, they confined her in a tiny room, did not even have a restroom. They observed her just to make sure that she didn't harm herself. But with the limitation in that place, she did not get to have the medication, her usual medication for the pain in her body. She did not get appropriate diet. She was frightened, and she felt she was literally in prison, and her crisis became so severe, and she was screaming and crying, so frightened for the whole day. And the second day, it was the pain, the physical pain, and her mental pain became even more severe, and she felt like she was going to lose her mind. And how fortunate that was for the merits from her ancestors, from her parents. Suddenly she remembered, because her family also had gone to Deer Park before, and she realized, if I'm in a room like this, like a prisoner, and I keep screaming and crying, they may think I'm really crazy, and they will keep me here. And that thought arose in her. And so she immediately went back to her breath. She kept going back to her breath, watching her breath, recognizing her breath as an in-breath. She knew it was an in-breath, an out-breath. She was aware that it was an out-breath. And so slowly, as she was anchoring her mind in her breath, then her body became calmer, quieter, and so she stopped crying, she stopped screaming, and simultaneously the pain in her body, which she needed to take the medication in that moment, the pain also subsided. Her mind calmed down, and that was what saved her, and the pain was not overwhelming for her anymore. And then her doctor actually eventually called the hospital to confirm her situation, and she was able to be released. I recount this story because I want to share with you that she was able to come back to her breath. And that was the bell of mindfulness for her, to help her to overcome her mental crisis. that was what saved her. And during the past year, more than 500,000 people died in the United States. So many people lost their job. People could not pay for their apartments, for their homes, that they had to lose their living place. People who died, who did not even get to see their loved ones before they die. And so all this created the crisis in all of us. And all of us, of course, we want things to be normal again. But we have to ask ourselves, if we go back to normal, is that enough? If we are practitioners, and to me personally, as I practice, I see that if we go back to what was before, to the status quo, like, or to go back to what was the last few months, is not enough. We have to wake up. We have to have the insight that the Buddha has taught us, the four about the noble truths. The pandemic exists. The physical crisis, the mental crisis, they do exist. The violence, the abuse exists. The death exists. And how can we wake up? How can we remain? We have to remain awakened with all these sounds of the bells of mindfulness. We need to continue to bring the energy of mindfulness into our daily life, so that we can transform, so that we live more beautifully, we live better for ourselves and the society. If we can do it like that, if we can hold on to this foundation of the 5 precepts, of the 5 mindfulness trainings, then we have safety, and we have protection, and we have enough strength to go forward, not to go back to normal, but to go forward. Now I invite all of us to breathe with awareness. Breathing in, we are aware. Oh, how fortunate it is that I am still breathing. I still have a chance to breathe. Breathing out, we breathe for our loved ones who are not breathing anymore. Dear beloved community, a few days ago I read an article in Scientific American. In this magazine, there was a journalist. She wrote about how to confront the crisis in the pandemic, how to confront the violence that has taken place in our families and society, the sexual abuse, to confront the violence, the hatred that escalate over time, the discrimination, the violence that culminate more and more in our society. Then psychotherapists and scientists, they have discovered that we have to practice mindfulness. And this journalist said that we have to live in awareness. We have to come back to the present moment. So today, I would like to focus on how to live in the present moment, how to come back to our mindful breathing as a way out of the crisis that we as individuals and as a society are going through. We come back to our mindful breathing and our mindful walking. So I ask my elder sister, when we walk to the main gate, when we go up from the gate, uphill, and if I walk fast, and if I get so involved in my sharing and my talking, then I feel that my chest felt really hot, very tight, and I feel dizzy. Immediately, I have to stop walking, stop talking. I have to close my eyes and only follow my breath. And it is in those moments that help me to come back to my balanced state, equilibrium. And so during the past year with the pandemic, brothers and sisters have also remained in the monastery. We also apply walking meditation a lot so that we can save, it's like we save wood for the winter to generate the warmth, the vaccination for ourselves, for our own immune system. And more I discover that mindful breathing is miraculous. If my mind is dispersed, if I'm walking and talking at the same time, then my breathing becomes very short. Then the oxygen that is brought into my body is not enough because my body, the demand increases. It needs to have more oxygen to make more energy to supply for the demand. But if I talk and I walk at the same time, then it does not meet the demand. And so if I stop and I breathe and I relax, then that will provide my body more oxygen to my whole body, to my brain. I see that is already very miraculous. And I see that when people suffer from lung diseases, from COVID, for example, I asked my sister to explain to me more how the lungs work when you get COVID. Then she shared with me that when one is infected with the virus, coronavirus, then the whole lungs, would become infected, be inflamed, and so people you get the inflammation, you get pneumonia, so the lungs become dysfunctional. People cannot breathe anymore. That's why they have to have the respirator to breathe for them. And if they cannot get the appropriate treatment, then they die. We cannot breathe anymore. So life and death all depends whether breathing exists or not, breathing is possible or not. And because of that, I also remember there was also our dear practitioner. She was only 60 years old, but she woke up and she fell, and we don't know if she had a stroke or not, but she had this hemorrhage in her brain, and it created like a tumor that pressed on her breathing center, and she was hospitalized for a few weeks, and she was on the respirator, and then after that she died when they discontinued the ventilation. Our teacher also had a stroke, but how fortunate it was, because thanks to his practice, thanks to his, how, I don't know how it worked, but it was miraculous that our teacher, Thai, was in coma for a month, but he was not on the ventilation. He was not on the on ventilation. He was able to breathe on his own, with more than 95% oxygen saturation. That was why he was able to come out of the coma on his own. And so I saw these experiences, and that woke me up, and to see the miracle of the breathing, the importance of breathing, it helps me to practice wholeheartedly, so that I can experience it for myself and to share with you, and to share wholeheartedly for my own practice, and not like selling fake items, telling you things that I do not experience or do not practice. So I want it to be authentic. My heart is out for the people who go through difficulties, and when we are so caught in our feelings, and we can cause a lot of suffering to ourselves and others. But if we can come back to our breath, then we can calm down, we can manage our feelings and our body, so that we don't cause further suffering to ourselves and people around us. I want to share a little about our daily life. When we talk about mindful breathing, we see that we have two parts. I'm very aware that I am fixing my rope, and I'm practicing to be aware that I'm fixing my rope so that it's proper. So please understand for me. Let's understand. I take a little time. I would like to share about breathing and breathing with awareness. Thở means breathing or the breath. And thở có ý thức means breathing with awareness. Normally, all of us, we breathe. If we are still alive, the trees, they breathe. The animals breathe. Microorganisms, they breathe. So every living being breathes in their own way. The question is whether we are aware of our breath. And if we practice mindfulness, and we learn that mindfulness means to bring the mind back to the present moment, so that body and mind can be in oneness. When we know how to bring the body and mind back together, bring the mind back to the body, because the body may be here, but the mind may be roaming elsewhere, to the past, to the future. A few days ago, somebody asked, during this pandemic, my head is very hot. I keep thinking, I keep being so afraid and tense. frightened. I don't know what will happen to my job, what will happen to my house. Will I have a home to live? And my head is so hot. And we know all this suffering exists, all these problems exist. And at the same time, we also know that we are still breathing, we are still alive. We need to remind ourselves and each other of this truth. So in order to bring the mind back to the body, we use mindful breathing. It is this mindful breathing that helps bring our mind back to our body, that helps us to be here one moment at a time, so that we can be present deeply in what we call as mindfulness, chánh niệm, right mindfulness. It is not a noun anymore, but it is an energy that we generate right in that moment, that we come back to our breath and be aware of our breath. This energy of mindfulness, of right mindfulness, is something not visible, and yet it helps us recognize what is happening in the present moment. It helps us to recognize that there's pain in our body, that it helps us to see that our mind is thinking endlessly, ceaselessly, that it is disturbed. And so only when we bring the mind back to the body, using the mindful breathing as the bridge, then we can see all this that are happening, things that are happening. Breathing in, I am aware that this is an in-breath. Breathing out, I am aware that this is an out-breath. When we are walking, we are aware that we are walking. When we are sitting, we are aware that we are aware. We are aware. So in that way, we train ourselves slowly to be there from one moment to another, to the next. This energy that we generate, it is this energy that the Buddha talked about in the five faculties and the 5 powers. These 5 faculties is like the five generators that we have. It's these 5 machines like faith, diligence, mindfulness, concentration, and insight. These are like the 5 companies that generate power. And so it's not something far-fetched, but something very common that we can practice in daily life. For example, when I exercise, I do the hula hoop, for example. I breathe in and breathe out. I count that as 10, as 1, in and out as 2. And I keep counting it on the tip of my fingers, 1 finger for 10 breaths. And so for my 10 fingers, that's 100 breaths. And I keep coming back to the breath like that. And time passes by amazingly quick, because when I'm completely there with my body and with my breath and with what I'm doing, and I see that when we are able to bring the mind back to the breath, then the mind is with the body. One moment here, one moment there, the work we're doing here, the work we're doing there. Slowly we train to connect all these dots together, and we are present. It becomes interesting to us, and we are sincere. We want to practice so that it can help us solve the problems that we have, the crisis, the anger, the violence that we experience in ourselves, in our society. When we practice and we experience this presence, this transformation, then we have faith. That's the first power that we generate. And the second power is tongue, is the diligence. The more positive experience we have, then we want to practice even more. We become more diligent, more diligent. And with our faith and diligence, then we will generate even more mindfulness. That's the third power, is mindfulness. We cannot just sit there and cry. We cannot sit there and complain all the time. We cannot ask somebody to give us the medication to solve our problems. In the end, each one of us have to know how to take care of ourselves so that we can transform the difficulties. I'm looking at the screen and I see so many of our friends, older in your age or younger. I see you as our aunties and uncles and dear friends. I know you have been practicing too. Don't you experience that when you practice and you become more interested in the practice? When we hear the sound of the bell, or when we hear a bird singing in spring, we hear the siren, the sound of the siren. Let us close our eyes for a moment and come back to this miraculous breath. So many people are not able to breathe anymore. We still are breathing. We still have a lot. We have lost a lot, and yet we still have a lot. Our hands are still there. Our breathing is still here. We can rebuild. We can do anything. If we have enough spiritual strength, we can go forward. As of our aunties, uncles, friends, the nurses, the doctors, everybody is trying to help people volunteer in these vaccination sites. Even though you have suffering, you are busy, but yet you still volunteer. Because when you volunteer, when people do volunteering work like that, people also experience meaning, reaching out, helping other people. And so in that way, in our practice, we take care of ourselves and each other. So these 5 powers that we cultivate in our daily life, the trust in the practice, the diligence in the practice, and the energy of mindfulness that we cultivate. And it is this energy of mindfulness that leads to the energy of concentration, which is the 4th power that we like. And when we have this energy of concentration, then we have insight, which is the 5th power. It is understanding this insight that helps us to see the situation clearly. When Brother George Floyd, a man of color, a black man, when last year when he was when we can call that it was violence and discrimination. He suffered from that. The police nailed on his neck, and he did not even have a weapon in his hand. He did not have anything, and he was a big man. The police was a big man, and he nailed on George Floyd, and he said, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe." But the policeman would not stop and could not see that the other person is suffering. If the other person is suffering, you are also suffering. If he cannot breathe, you also cannot breathe. But because of his anger, his discrimination, because of his day after day, it's built up that there was no space in him, in the policeman. So he was not able to see that the breathing of the other person is your own breathing. And so that's why it caused the George Floyd to die. And now the police is in prison, and he is suffering. So if we live in our daily life with awareness, then if we know what we need to do to stop in situations like that, so that we don't cause suffering to others and to ourselves, when we know what's happening, we can build more love, more stability in our in our relationships, in our families, in our society, so that we can have a positive relationship and help people in our society, so that we can offer love to people in the world. Wouldn't that be more beautiful and more healing? I'd like to invite our friends to be still, sit stably, sit as a mountain, and breathe. Let us breathe. Dear Sangha, talking about going back to normal. We hope that when the pandemic slowly it's weaning, we want to go back to our normal life. But if we do not take refuge in our mindfulness practice, if we do not take refuge in the 5 mindfulness trainings, the 14 mindfulness trainings, so that we can have this insight of interbeing, then we will not be able to change the situation of discrimination, violence, anger, and fear. We cannot change global warming, climate change.
cái sự hâm nóng của
Climate change,
nó càng lúc nó càng
more and more,
không giảm đi.
it will worsen. Climate change, many things will take place, many we cannot be sure. So that is why we need to learn to protect ourselves and society. We need to protect ourselves with practices, with a spiritual life. Recently, we had the International Women's Day. There was a young person.
Cái người bạn đời của mình qua đời lúc đó mới 37 tuổi, để lại một
Her partner passed away, and she was only 37 years old, and she had to work from the morning 7, 8 o'clock. She had to leave already, and at night 7, 8 at night she would come home, and that person and had a child only 7 or 8 years old. And sometimes the grandmother came to help take care. And so when the woman came home and saw that the child was crying and say, oh, this Mexican kid next door argue with me, fought with me. And so this woman held her son and listened to him, and then she said to her son, you know, your father was able to live with you for 11 years. But that boy next door, his father died when he was only 2 years old. And he lived in Mexico, so, he has many difficulties. All that he has is his mother, but you have had 11 years with your own father, and you also have aunties and cousins around you. Why don't you take this piece of candy and go give it to him, and then you can enjoy a piece of candy together? So then that can help you not to be so angry with each other anymore. So the boy did that. He went to give the other boy a piece of candy, and they enjoyed it. And the resentment, the anger, they could eat, and they were children, so they could overcome that anger right away, instead of saying, "Oh, my son, how dare you to do that," and then cause more anger and hatred in the children towards each other. So that child grew up just like a small plant to become a tree. Whatever that you feed the plant, it will become that tree. If you can feed that plant with love, with inclusiveness, and then that plant will grow up to be a beautiful tree with shade and not be ruined by hatred and anger. And so this story, when this boy grew up, this is a real story. And when he grew up, and he was married, and his wife betrayed him, and he still did not resent her, but he wished her happiness, and he left with just a bag of his clothes, and he did not cause more anger and hatred towards his wife. And so that's what happens when we know how to practice, we know how to cultivate love and understanding, and we feed our children with that energy. And when they grow older, they know how to live with themselves, and they know how to live with the people around them, with the people at work, with their spouses, and they know how to create a wholesome energy. And so we also see that the life in mindfulness, most concretely, is our mindful breathing, to bring our mind back to our body in each moment, in each action, bodily action that we have. We learn to be present. We learn to relax. We learn to smile. We learn to recognize the situation and see it as it is and accept it, take care of it. And another method that we can go, we need to see that when we sitting meditation is very good, and we also learn to apply the mindful steps as well, because we walk a lot. We don't always sit, we walk. So when I'm walking towards the kitchen, do I know how many steps can I be aware of? Have you ever felt that? Have you ever felt that the bottom, the sole of your foot actually touches the earth? If you are not able to touch that, then it will be a great regret, because one day we may not be able to walk anymore. One day we may be bedbound, and then we remember the time that we were able to walk so freely, and yet we did not appreciate it. We cannot be in touch with Mother Earth anymore, with our steps anymore. When we become ashes, it would be a pity. So we need to learn to come back to our breath, to our steps. And when we breathe out, we learn to also relax and release all the tension in our body and in our mind. Release it. When we walk from one point to the next, we learn to make a contract with ourselves that we will train to come back to the steps. So this is the work of love. This is the work of healing, the work that we say that it has the internal strength. It gives us internal strength so that when the storms come, when another pandemic comes about, when another violence takes place, and then we know what we need to do. Otherwise, we will be frightened. We will cause more suffering. And the hatred, the violence in us become escalated. We live with somebody 1 year, 2 years, 2, 3 years, or even just a few months. We can already develop such hatred and anger towards each other, and that our children will suffer from it. So our mindful breathing, our mindful walking, our stability in our posture helps us to have a spacious mind. When we have a spacious mind, we can be happier and we judge less. We become less critical. We are less competitive towards other people. We don't want to win, to push other people down in order to be better than others. I feel very fortunate because in my life, what has saved me is that instead of fighting with people, wanting to be better than people, I learned to be still. I learned to take a step back. And it has saved my life. It has created peace and stability in my life. We don't need to win the other person with, get the final words with somebody. We don't have to snatch that power, that position for what? So that in the end, there's just more violence and hatred and suffering and drama in our life. So from the practice, we touch true happiness, true peace, and it also helps us to see how to respond to situation more compassionately, more appropriately. That practice is medicine. We don't need to wait until we go to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist to give us the medication for our mental crisis, for our depression or anxiety or PTSD. We need to also take refuge in one breath at a time, one step at a time, one moment at a time. Learn to take care of ourselves, and that helps us to increase the internal strength so that these 5 powers of faith, of diligence, mindfulness, concentration, and insight will become more and more powerful, like electric generators that will generate more electricity, more power. We still have ourselves, we still have each other, we still have the community, we still have our Sangha. These are great news. We still have the seeds of wholesomeness in us. These are the merits, these are the blessings from our ancestors, from life we still have there. These energies of the Buddhas, of the Bodhisattvas, of the kind, good people over time. These are also the fruits, the flowers that we have planted in our way of living, in our practice. Like in the West, we have a saying, what goes around comes around. Whatever we do, we will reap. Whatever we harvest, plant, we will reap and harvest that fruit. And that is why in our inner spiritual life, we learn to come back diligently to our breath and our steps. Let us cultivate a spiritual life, spiritual dimension in our life. Some of us, we say, oh, I know about mindfulness. I'm a practitioner. And if we do not know how to come back to our breath, if we do not come back to our steps, then we are not truly practitioners yet. A few days ago, I told my sister, I said, I was telling her, I was so aware of my breath as I was exercising. And yet a few moments later, I took a hat that was not mine. So mindfulness and unmindfulness, they are there one second to the next, but we just come back. As soon as I realized it was not my hat, I smiled and I returned it and got my own hat. So this is day by day as we practice, our mind becomes more stable, more spacious. It's clear. And that is the foundation of happiness, of true happiness. I can share with you that everything is simple and yet miraculous. You don't have to do anything extraordinary. Just cherish that you are still breathing. Cherish, appreciate that you still have many conditions of happiness. We still have many more conditions than many people. Right in the US, we almost have 100 million people who got the vaccine, and yet all over the world, very few people have gotten their vaccination. And so we are very blessed. Whatever anger or resentment we have, let the rain wash it away, put it down, build, cultivate our family, cultivate more peace and love and harmony in ourselves, in our family, in the world. Let us aim towards that. We very much need each other. We very much need to love one another, give ourselves a hug and an embrace. Thank you, dear beloved family. I prepare a lot, but I don't know how much I was able to say. But I just share from the bottom of my heart. And I very much hope that in this occasion, you become more interested in the practice. You become more wholehearted and more diligent in the practice, so that you can live a life in awareness. Come back to the breath more often, the mindful breathing. Come back to the steps with awareness more often, so that you have more stability. And the steps in stability, in mindfulness, all of this energy can help us to confront and resolve, transform and heal all the violence and the suffering, the discrimination that's there in our world. Thank you so much for being here with us.